When this person realizes the empath stopped chasing something inside them breaks. The air shifts. You know this feeling. The text messages cease. The endless stream of your warm, sustaining energy comes to a sudden halt. For so long you poured your essence into an endless void, hoping the sheer force of your compassion would awaken something dormant in them. You offered grace before they recognized their own cruelty. You regulated their nervous system at the expense of your own peace. Every time their chaotic nature threatened to shatter the fragile bond, your empathy stepped in as the steadfast anchor. But a distinct threshold is crossed. The unseen emotional labor ends. Imagine the exact moment this transition happens. It rarely arrives wrapped in a grand confrontation or a fiery argument. Often the final severance stands as a breathless hush. Your mind registers a cold, irrefutable truth, and your physical body follows suit. The chronic wash of cortisol that kept you in a hyper-vigilant state of rescue begins to recede. Your vagus nerve signals safety in solitude. You lay down the heavy burden. You choose the quiet. Across the invisible tether, their environment grows strange. At first, they mistake your stillness for a temporary retreat. They assume you need a moment to catch your breath, gathering strength for another round of relentless giving. They remain accustomed to your boundless reservoir of patience. Their baseline of comfort relies on your constant, predictable pursuit. You played the initiator of healing. You built the bridges across the growing chasm. When your hands pull back, that chasm cracks wide open. The space between you fills with an unfamiliar, oppressive weight. This new silence possesses a gravity they never learned to navigate. For the empath, silence offers a sanctuary to an exhausted spirit. For the individual who fed off your vibrant light, this same silence acts as a suffocating pressure. They strain their ears for the familiar sound of your footsteps rushing back to mend the fractures, but they encounter nothing. They meet only the deafening roar of their own isolation. Your absence shatters the mirror they use to gaze at a superior version of themselves. You reflected their buried potential, shielding them from the harsh glare of their own shadows. Without your steady stream of emotional supply, their internal world grows dark. The atmosphere thickens. A profound hollow ache takes root where your validation used to reside. They sit in the cold room, oblivious to the reality that this represents no mere pause. This marks a definitive conclusion. The chase stands finished. They smile at the quiet. A familiar, comforting narrative takes shape within their ego. They convince themselves you sit in the distance, pouting, retreating to lick your wounds, before returning to their orbit. In these initial hours and days, they wear an armor of smug certainty. An internal monologue whispers that they hold the ultimate power, framing your withdrawal as just another dramatic plea for their attention. They expect your surrender. Inside their mind, no alarms sound. Deep within the temporal lobe, the amygdala remains dormant. This almond-shaped cluster, responsible for processing fear and threat, fails to register your absence as a permanent loss. It perceives the silence as a minor pause in a predictable game. They condition their nervous system to view your devotion as a limitless resource, an aquifer that never runs dry regardless of the extraction rate. So they lean back. They wait. They anticipate the familiar vibration of a screen, the long paragraph explaining your feelings, the customary olive branch extended from your tired hands. This illusion of control acts as a potent narcotic. It numbs them to the seismic reality shifting beneath their feet. They parade through their routine with manufactured confidence, telling themselves they needed this space anyway. They mistook your profound capacity for forgiveness as a permanent flaw. They assumed your emotional depth was a vulnerability meant for their exploitation. Because they lack the bandwidth to comprehend your exhaustion, they misinterpret your ironclad boundary as a fleeting tantrum. Days stretch into a longer timeline. The anticipated message never arrives. The expected apology remains unwritten. The atmosphere in their immediate world begins to stagnate. Smugness fractures replaced by a subtle gnawing irritation. They pace the floorboards, they monitor their feeds. A nagging question arises as to why the established script changed. You always played the pursuer, absorbing their dismissive behavior and transmuting it into a reason to love them harder. You shattered the foundational rules of their universe, yet pride demands they hold the line. They engage in passive-aggressive displays of indifference, broadcasting curated snapshots of a vibrant life to prove they survive unaffected. They throw pebbles into the dark, hoping to hear the splash of your reaction. The water remains undisturbed. The mirror reflects nothing. The fortress of their ego starts to show hairline cracks as a slow dawn breaks over their perception. They miscalculated your strength. You did not walk away to manipulate the dynamic. You walked away to survive them. The silence stretches. The body keeps a score of its own. Inside their brain, a chemical famine begins. For months or years, your attention served as a high-grade stimulant. Every text you sent, every tear you shed, and every boundary you compromised triggered a surge of dopamine in their neural pathways. They became addicted to the spotlight of your empathy. You functioned as their external regulator. When their internal world grew chaotic, they provoked you. Your reaction provided a hit of serotonin, stabilizing their fractured ego and granting them a false sense of peace. Now the supply vanishes. The receptor sites starve. A profound neurobiological crash takes hold. This represents no mere metaphor. It stands as a physiological withdrawal. Dopamine dictates the reward center of the human brain, firing specifically through the nucleus accumbens. It drives motivation, craving, and the anticipation of pleasure. When you stopped chasing, you shut off the faucet. The sudden deficit leaves them restless, agitated, and crawling in their own skin. They reach for their phone 100 times a day. They monitor your digital footprint, searching for a ghost. They crave the quick hit of your validation, but the well sits bone dry. A physical sensation accompanies this chemical drop. A tightening grips their chest. Their sleep patterns shatter into fragmented nightmares. Without your soothing presence to act as a buffer, their nervous system spirals into dysregulation. They experience an ambient anxiety that refuses to settle. The quiet they initially welcomed now morphs into a stark interrogation room. The walls close in, forcing them to examine their own reflection, understand the exact mechanics of their addiction. They never craved a balanced partnership. They craved the sheer power of the dynamic. The chase fueled their delusion of superiority. Your constant, breathless effort painted them as a rare prize worth winning. Every time you forgave an unforgivable act, their brain flooded with the intoxicating chemicals of dominance. You sacrificed your own neurochemistry to keep theirs afloat. Your cortisol spiked so their dopamine could surge. The tables pivot the moment you walk away. The withdrawal symptoms peak with relentless intensity. Their mind scrambles for a replacement source of supply, but genuine empathy proves scarce. Surface-level interactions fail to deliver the same potent high. They recognize the unique, irreplaceable quality of your devotion. Nobody else gazes at their broken pieces and offers gold to mend the cracks. Nobody else bleeds to keep them warm. The physical ache of this realization manifests as a hollow pit in the stomach. Serotonin plummets, plunging their mood into a volatile abyss. The world loses its vibrant color. The distractions they usually rely upon ring hollow and inadequate. They attempt to fill the void with noise, surrounding themselves with shallow company or throwing themselves into frantic activity. Yet the noise fails to penetrate the growing, icy numbness. Their muscles hold the tension of unspoken apologies. A heavy fatigue sets into their bones. The brain demands the missing substance, screaming for a single drop of your attention to alleviate the suffering. They realize, perhaps too late, that the careless game they played carried a fatal cost. The board sits empty. The pieces remain untouched. They are left alone to metabolize the poison of their own actions. The withdrawal symptoms burn through their system, leaving a stark clarity in their wake. They stare at the silence. The illusion of your eventual return shatters into jagged fragments. A cold dread pools at the base of their spine as the finality of your absence registers. This quiet carries a different texture than before. It feels permanent. The stone door of your boundary slammed shut, and they hold no key to reopen it. Their ego stands naked in the harsh light of reality. For years they constructed a false self out of smoke and mirrors. They built a grand facade to hide a fragile, terrified core. Your relentless pursuit acted as the mortar holding these bricks together. You looked past their flaws, projecting a noble spirit onto a barren landscape. Every time you chased them, you validated their mask. You provided the necessary evidence that they were worthy of agonizing, persistent devotion. When you stop running after them, the scaffolding collapses. The false self loses its primary architect. They look inward and find a terrifying expanse of nothingness. The grand narrative they spun about their own superiority crumbles into dust. Without your desperate attempts to fix them, they face the wreckage they created. They must gaze at their reflection without the softening filter of your grace. The image looking back terrifies them. Something vital breaks inside their chest during this reckoning. The mechanism of denial snaps under the brutal weight of the truth. They realize you did not fail to love them. You loved them beyond reason, sacrificing your own emotional equilibrium to stabilize their erratic moods. The failure rests on their inability to receive such a profound gift. A sharp pang of grief slices through their usual defenses. They mourn the loss of the only person who offered genuine safety. Their mind replays the memories of your exhausted pleas. They recall the tears they dismissed as mere manipulation. They remember the boundaries they trampled with careless arrogance. Each memory strikes like a physical blow, heavy and precise. The amygdala awakens to the magnitude of the threat, triggering a cascade of primal panic. The loss of your energy represents an existential crisis for a fractured ego. The foundation of their identity relied on your subservience. That foundation just washed away into the sea. They stand at the edge of an emotional abyss. Old coping mechanisms offer zero solace. Deflecting blame yields no relief. Projecting their insecurities onto strangers feels hollow and pathetic. They crave the specific healing frequency of your presence. They yearn for the gentle touch that once soothed their chronic, agonizing restlessness. But the well sits sealed. You packed up your radiant light and walked away from a darkness they refused to heal. A profound, inescapable loneliness settles over their spirit. This isolation stretches far beyond physical distance. It constitutes a psychological exile. They banish the most authentic connection they ever possessed through sheer negligence and pride. The gravity of their mistake pulls them down into a suffocating despair. A horrifying realization crystallizes in their conscious mind. They broke the empath who spent a lifetime trying to put them back together. Now, they must navigate the ruins alone. The mirror lies shattered on the floor. They stand bleeding among the glass, facing the hollow shell they became. Panic sets in. The sympathetic nervous system hijacks their logic. A primal alarm bell rings within their biology, demanding an immediate return to the old equilibrium. They enter a frantic state of fight or flight. Their blood floods with cortisol, mirroring the very chaos they once forced upon your body. To survive this internal tempest, they must manufacture a bridge back to your energy. They must elicit a response to soothe their own fraying nerves. The tactics begin to shift. Smugness morphs into calculated desperation. You might notice sudden bizarre attempts to pierce the veil of your silence. They orbit your digital world like a starving predator. Watching every story becomes an obsession. They leave ambiguous comments. Sometimes they deploy the classic psychological maneuver known as hoovering. Like a vacuum, they attempt to suck you back into the toxic cycle using manufactured nostalgia. A late-night text arrives bearing a half-hearted apology, a feigned emergency, or a nostalgic memory of a shared song. Do not let this sudden warmth confuse your healing heart. This behavior stems from severe emotional dysregulation, not genuine remorse. Their hands tremble as they type messages they later delete. The brain screams for regulation, commanding them to find the external soothe you always provided. They need you to react so their spinning compass can locate true north. Anger, sadness, or frustration, any response will suffice. A negative reaction still provides a potent dose of supply, proving they hold real estate in your mind. If you engage, their anxiety subsides. If you defend yourself, their fractured ego repairs itself on the back of your vital life force. But you remain a fortress of stillness. You observe their maneuvers from a detached vantage point. The bait drops into the water, yet you refuse to bite. This steadfast non-reaction amplifies their internal crisis. The tactics escalate into chaotic theater. They might recruit allies, spinning elaborate tales of your cruelty to paint themselves as the wounded victim. Artificial emergencies are orchestrated, hoping your ingrained savior complex will override your new boundaries. Your empathy used to be a predictable button they could press at will. Now the wiring sits severed. Watch as the mask slips further. Their frantic movements reveal the hollow core beneath the bravado. When the subtle approaches fail, the facade drops to expose raw hostility. They hurl accusations into the void. Guilt becomes their weapon of choice, turning your inherent goodness against your newfound peace. Every desperate action exposes the fragility of their spirit and the sheer terror of facing their own shadows. Thrashing against the quiet walls of your absence, they drown in a sea of their own making. They grasp at ghosts to keep their head above the turbulent water. The contrast becomes stark and illuminating. You rest in quiet dignity while they perform an exhausting, chaotic dance for an audience of none. The spell lies broken. You see the machinery of their manipulation laid bare, stripped of its former mystique. This desperate scrambling acts as the ultimate validation of your choice. You recognize the parasite starving without its host. You feel no urge to throw a lifeline. You simply let the storm rage outside your impenetrable walls. Shift your gaze inward. The storm rages outside your walls, yet your internal landscape transforms. A profound stillness replaces the frantic energy of the chase. You no longer wake up with a racing heart. The heavy, suffocating dread lifts from your chest. For years, your body operated as a crisis management center, burning through reserves to keep a sinking ship afloat. You surrendered your vitality to sustain their illusion. Now, the rescue mission ends. You anchor yourself in the present moment. Your biology responds to this newfound safety. The chronic flood of cortisol begins to recede. This stress hormone, which kept you locked in hypervigilance, drains from your bloodstream, allowing your adrenal glands to rest. Your parasympathetic nervous system finally takes the wheel. The vagus nerve, a master conductor of peace, sends signals of profound relaxation down your spine. It whispers to your racing heart to slow its rhythm. It commands your lungs to draw deep, nourishing breaths. The physical inflammation caused by endless emotional labor starts to heal. Your prefrontal cortex regains control, lifting the dense fog of confusion. You reclaim the sanctuary of your own physical form. Observe the stark contrast between your worlds. Across the severed connection, they drown in the chaos of their own making, scrambling for external regulation. Meanwhile, you cultivate a quiet, unshakable power. Silent mornings become your new standard. A simple cup of coffee no longer brings a knot of anxiety twisting in your stomach. You realize your empathy represents a sacred currency, not a cheap commodity meant for their exploitation. You cease pouring gold into a bottomless well. Gathering your fragmented pieces, you forge them into solid armor. The urge to explain yourself dissolves. The desperate desire to secure closure from a closed mind simply evaporates into thin air. This constitutes the true awakening of an empath. You discover that walking away requires immense strength compared to the familiar habit of holding on. Facing the grief of the illusion takes courage. You mourn the beautiful potential you projected onto them rather than the harsh reality they offered. The hurt remains, but the pain feels clean. It washes away the toxic residue they left behind. It cleanses the wounds they infected with constant doubt. Your intuition, long silenced by their manipulation, speaks with a clear, resonant voice. You trust your own perception again. You recognize the game and refuse to play. Your vibrant energy returns in rushing waves. The creativity, the joy, and the radiant light they tried to dim ignite once more. Building your life upon a fortress of self-worth becomes your only priority. Their desperate attempts to breach your peace bounce off an invisible shield. You watch their maneuvers with detached grace, recognizing their suffering without claiming it as your personal burden. You hold the line. You keep the heavy door locked shut. The silence you bravely created becomes a fertile, sacred soil where your spirit finally learns to thrive. The final severance requires no grand declaration. It occurs in the quiet, hidden spaces of your healing mind. The heavy iron gate swings shut, and you drop the key into the dark ocean. You recognize the profound truth that some fractures resist the cure of empathy. Some voids devour all the light you pour into them, offering nothing but an endless, echoing chill in return. You made the conscious choice to stop feeding the void. Inside your brain, the toxic neural pathways of the trauma bond begin to wither. The synapses that once fired together in panic and hypervigilance undergo a vital pruning process. Without the constant draining stimulus of their manufactured chaos, your mind rewires itself for lasting peace. You forge new, healthy connections built on solid self-respect, grounded reality, and immovable boundaries. The physical aching urge to check on them fades into a distant, harmless memory. You observe the phantom limb of the relationship, but the phantom pain fails to dictate your daily movements. They must remain behind to sweep up the jagged shards of their fractured ego. You left them with the most terrifying companion they could ever encounter, their own unvarnished, authentic reflection. The chemical famine of their withdrawal will run its miserable course. Their desperate, frantic maneuvers will exhaust their final energetic reserves. They stand alone in the deafening silence you constructed, haunted by the knowledge of the rare, irreplaceable force they drove away. Something fundamental inside them shattered the exact day you stopped running. That break belongs to them alone. You carry zero obligation to fix the ruin. You step into a calm, radiant dawn. The air tastes crisp and untainted. The heavy burden lies miles behind you, buried under the impenetrable foundation of your reclaimed power. You move with the quiet, unshakable dignity of a soul that survived a brutal tempest and learned to command the wind. If this specific journey resonates with your own quiet revolution, you hold a permanent sanctuary here. Share the story of your departure in the comments below. Your survival might serve as the exact beacon another exhausted empath needs to navigate out of the dark. Protect your peace. Guard your radiant energy. Welcome to Velvet Energy.